I moved into my first house last spring. Nothing fancy, just a small two-bedroom in a quiet suburb. The kind of place where everyone waves when they're getting their meal. Everything seemed perfect until my new neighbour moved in about a month later. His name was David, and he seemed normal enough at first. Mid-40s, always dressed in khakis and polo shirts, and drove a clean silver sedan. He introduced himself the day he moved in, and even brought some cookies. But then I started to notice some unsettling things. Every morning when I left for work, he'd be standing at his kitchen window. Not doing dishes, not drinking coffee. He was just standing there, watching. At first I thought it was coincidence. Maybe he was an early riser like me. But it happened every single day, for 2 weeks straight. Then I noticed he was timing his trips to the meal with mine. I'd step outside, and within 30 seconds he'd be there. "Oh hey," he'd say, like it was such a surprise to see me. This happened probably 10 times before I started waiting until I saw his car leave to go outside to collect my meal. The breaking point came on a Friday night. I was having a few friends over. It was nothing crazy, just some wine and bad reality TV. Around 10 p.m, my friend Jessica says, "Sarah, is that your neighbour?" I looked out my living room window, and there was David, standing in his backyard in the dark, facing my house. He wasn't moving or doing yard work. He was just standing there in the shadows, perfectly still. "How long has he been there?" I asked. "I noticed him about 20 minutes ago," Jessica said. We watched for another 10 minutes, yet he didn't move. Not once. I called the non-emergency police line in the morning, but what could I tell them? My neighbour stands in his own yard. They basically said unless he was in my property or threatening me, there really wasn't much they could do. That's when I decided to install a security camera. The footage I captured over the next few weeks still gives me chills. David would come outside every night around 9 p.m. and just stand there. Sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for over an hour. Always facing my house. The timestamp showed he did this whether my lights were on or off, whether my car was in the driveway or not. But the worst part? On Tuesday night, the camera caught him slowly walking closer to my house. Not onto my property, but right up to the line. He stood there for 43 minutes, just outside my bedroom window. I moved out 2 weeks later. I found out from my old neighbour across the street that David had done the same thing to a previous owner, a single woman in her 30s who suddenly left after living there 6 months. The house has been empty for 4 months now. Sometimes I drive by to see if David's still doing his nightly vigil. Every night at 9 p.m, he stands in that backyard, watching an empty house. I rented the bottom floor of a duplex during my senior year. It was a split-level house with thin walls, but the rent was cheap and it was close to campus. The upstairs unit had been empty when I moved in, which honestly was pretty nice. No footsteps or loud music. That unfortunately all changed in October, when my new upstairs neighbour moved in. I actually never met the guy, or girl. I honestly couldn't tell from the voice. They moved in during the day, while I was at class, and they seemed to keep weird hours. I'd hear movement up there, mostly late at night, or very early in the morning. At first it was just normal stuff. Footsteps, furniture being moved around, and the occasional thump. But after about a week, the sounds got weird. It started with this rhythmic tapping. Not like someone typing or drumming their fingers, more deliberate. Always 3 taps, then silence for exactly 30 seconds, then 3 more taps. This would go on for hours, usually starting around 2 a.m. I tried banging on the ceiling a few times, but it never stopped. If anything, it seemed to get louder. Then came the dragging sounds, like someone was pulling heavy furniture across the floor. But it happened every night. Same pattern. Drag it from one side of the room to the other, then back again, over and over. This started happening around 3 a.m., right after the tapping stopped. I was honestly losing my mind from lack of sleep, so I decided to go upstairs and talk to whoever it was. The building was old, so both units shared the same front entrance. I could access the upstairs apartment from the inside. I climbed up the stairs around 3:30 a.m. in the middle of one of these drag-in sections, but as soon as I got to their door, everything went silent. I knocked and waited. There was nothing, no footsteps or any sounds at all. It was like the apartment was empty. Hello? I left downstairs. Could you keep it down a bit? Still no answer. I went back to my apartment, and within 5 minutes, the dragging sound started again, this time louder than before. This went on for 2 more weeks. I tried going upstairs at different times, during the day, in the evening, but still, I never got an answer. The sounds only happened late at night, and they always stopped the moment I approached the door. Finally, I complained to my landlord. He seemed confused when I described the situation. "What upstairs, neighbour?" he asked. "The person who moved in last month," I said. He just stared at me. "That unit's been empty since the previous tenant died in July. I haven't rented it out yet because I'm still dealing with his estate." I felt my stomach drop. "That's impossible. I hear someone up there every night." We went upstairs together. The landlord used his key. We opened the door, and dust particles floated in the afternoon sunlight. The place was completely empty, except for some old furniture covered in sheets. Furniture that clearly hadn't been moved in months. But here's the thing that still haunts me. There were scratches on the hardwood floor. Deep gouges, like something heavy had been dragged back and forth across the same path over and over again. I moved out the following weekend. I never found out what was making the sounds, and honestly, I don't want to know. I moved into a new town for work when my daughter Emma was 7. It was a new job, new house, and a fresh start. The neighbourhood seemed perfect. It was an area with good schools, safe streets, and friendly people. Our next door neighbour was this old woman named Mrs. Chen. She appeared to be in her 70s, lived alone, and seemed sweet. She brought us a casserole the day we moved in, and offered to help with anything we needed. "I raised 4 children," she told me. "I know how hard it can be on your own." At first, her help was generally appreciated. She'd offer to watch Emma if I had to work late. She'd bring over extra food that she cooked. Emma seemed to like her too, which was important, because my daughter was pretty shy around new people. But then, Mrs. Chen started showing up unannounced. A lot. She'd knock on her door at 7 a.m. with fresh muffins. She'd appear in our backyard when Emma was playing, claiming she was checking on her garden that bordered our fence. She'd call over during dinner to see if we needed anything from the store. I tried to be polite about it. She was elderly and she seemed lonely, But honestly, it was a bit overwhelming. Emma started getting clingy, saying she didn't like when Mrs. Chen came over anymore. She asked too many questions, Mommy, Emma told me one night. What kind of questions, sweetie? About you, when you come home, where you go, and if you have a boyfriend? That made me uncomfortable, but I figured she was just being nosy, in a harmless old lady way. I decided to have a gentle conversation with her about boundaries. But before I could, something happened that changed everything. I came home from work on Thursday to find Emma sitting on her front steps crying. Mrs. Chen was nowhere in sight, which was weird because she was supposed to be watching Emma after school. What's wrong, baby? I asked. Mrs. Chen took me to her house, Emma said through her tears. She said we had to practice. Practice what? Living there. She said someday I might have to live with her, and she wanted me to know where everything was. I knelt down to Emma's level. What do you mean, practice living there? She showed me which bed would be mine. She had clothes for me in the closet. She bought them in case I needed to stay over. I immediately called the police, but Mrs. Chen's story was that Emma had asked to see her house, and that she'd only be trying to make her feel welcome. The clothes? Gifts she planned to give Emma for her birthday. Nothing illegal about anything of it. But I wasn't taking any chances. I told Mrs. Chen that Emma was no longer allowed to go to her house, and I'd be making other arrangements for after-school care. Mrs. Chen smiled when I told her this, but her eyes went cold. Of course, whatever you think is best. That night, I was putting Emma to bed, and she whispered, "Why? Mrs. Chen is in her window." I looked out Emma's bedroom window toward Mrs. Chen's house. Sure enough, there she was, standing at her upstairs window in the dark, looking directly at Emma's room. This became a nightly thing. Every evening, Mrs. Chen would stand at that window from about 8 p.m. until we turned off Emma's light. Sometimes she'd wave. Emma started having nightmares. I installed curtains and told Emma to keep them closed. But honestly, it didn't help knowing she was still there. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I was at the grocery store with Emma when she grabbed my arm. "Mommy, look." Mrs. Chen was 3 aisles over, but she wasn't shopping. She was just following us, staying far enough back that she thought we wouldn't notice. When I made eye contact with her, she quickly grabbed something off the shelf and pretended to read the label. We left immediately and took a longer route home. And sure enough, Mrs. Chen's car was behind us the whole time. I put the house in the market later that week. The day the moving truck came, Mrs. Chen stood in her yard, watching every piece of furniture get loaded up. As we drove away, Emma looked back and said, "She's crying, Mommy." I looked in my rearview mirror. Mrs. Chen was standing there. Mrs. Chen was standing there, watching our car disappear down the street. And yeah, she was crying. We've been at our new house now for 6 months. But last week, Emma's teacher told me that an old woman had come to the school asking about Emma, wanting to know what grade she was in, what time school ended, things like that. The woman gave her name as Mrs. Chen. We live 4 hours away from our old house now. I have no idea how she found us. I work the graveyard shift at a small office complex, so I'm usually getting home around 7 a.m, just when most people are heading to work. Due to my schedule, I sleep during the day, and I'm pretty used to keeping quiet so I don't disturb the neighbours. When I moved into my apartment, the unit next to mine was occupied by a family: mom, dad, and 2 kids. I typically hear family sounds during the evening: TV, kids playing, normal stuff. They seemed to keep it reasonable, which I appreciated, since I was mostly trying to sleep. They moved out in March, and for about a month the apartment was empty, until my new neighbour moved in. I had never actually seen this person, which really wasn't unusual, given my schedule. I started noticing they seemed to be on a similar schedule to me though. I'd hear them moving around during the night, and their apartment would go quiet during the day. Honestly, I thought it was pretty cool, a neighbour who won't wake me up with daytime noise. But then I realised their schedule wasn't just similar to mine, it was almost identical. I'd get home at 7 AM, and I'd hear the door close at 7:05. I'd wake up around 3 PM, and hear them moving around 3:15 PM. I'd leave for work at 10:45, and hear the door open at 10:50. This went on for weeks. Perfect synchronization, just 5 to 10 minutes behind whatever I was doing. Then I started noticing other weird things. My newspaper would be missing from my doorstep, but I found it later that day, placed neatly in front of my door. Like someone had borrowed it and returned it. Packages would disappear for hours, then reappear. My mail would be shifted around in my mailbox. I mentioned it to my landlord, asking if there was some mix-up with mail delivery. "What, neighbour?" he asked, just like in the other story. "The person in 4B, I said. You know, the one next door." He looked confused. 4B has been empty since the Hendersons moved out. I haven't found a new tenant yet. "That's impossible. I hear someone in there every night." We went to check the apartment together. The landlord used his master key, and we found the place completely empty. It didn't feel empty though, if that makes sense. I felt like someone just stepped out, and there were signs that someone had been there. The carpet had impressions where furniture had been placed. The bathroom mirror was slightly fogged, like someone had just taken a hot shower. "I don't understand," the landlord said. "No one has access to this unit except me." That night, I decided to stay awake and listen carefully to the sounds coming from 4B. Sure enough, around 11 PM, I heard the front door open and close, footsteps moving around and water running. I crept out into the hallway and listened at the door. I could definitely hear someone moving around in there. Footsteps, cabinet doors opening and closing, and the TV turning on. I knocked on the door. "Hello? I know you're in there." The sound stopped immediately. Complete silence. I knocked again. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to know who you are." Still nothing. I went back to my apartment, but stayed awake listening. Around 3 AM, I heard what sounded like my own alarm clock going off. Except mine was set for 3 PM, not 3 AM. This is when I realised they weren't just copying my schedule. They were living my exact routine, 12 hours ahead of me. I called in sick to work that night, and decided to stay out the hallway. I wanted to see who was going in and out of the apartment. I waited from 10 PM until 6 AM. I never saw anyone come or go, but I heard all the unusual sounds from inside the apartment. At 6:45 AM, 15 minutes before I usually get home from work, the sound stopped completely. I got the landlord to let me into the apartment again, but everything was the same as before. Except this time, there was something new. On the kitchen counter, there was a piece of paper with my work schedule written on it. Not just my current schedule, I had my shifts mapped out for the next 3 months, including some overtime I'd picked up. I moved out the next day. Didn't give any notice. Didn't get my security deposit back. I just packed my stuff and left. I found out later from another tenant that weird things started happening in my old apartment after I moved out. The new tenant complained about hearing footsteps and voices from 4B at all hours. But again, the landlord checked, and 4B was always empty. The building manager finally decided to seal up the apartment, board over the door, disconnect the utilities, the whole works. Sometimes I wonder if that thing that was copying my routine so perfectly, what happens to it when the person it's copying disappears? Does it just wait? Does it find someone else to mimic? I drive by that building sometimes on my way to work. The windows in 4B are always dark now. But last week I swear I saw a figure standing at the window, watching the parking lot, watching and waiting. So you have it, 4 true stories about new neighbours that definitely aren't the kind of people you want live next door. If any of these sound familiar or you've had your own creepy neighbour experiences, let me know in the comments. And remember, if something feels off about your neighbours, trust your instincts. It's better to seem paranoid than to ignore the warning signs. Thanks for watching.